get started. My name is Matt Arnold, and this is a talk on the 6 people you meet in volunteer organizations. Write my name here on this placard. My qualifications for providing this talk are I have been running all volunteer, not-for-profit organizations and participating in them for 21 years. And mostly that's what my life tends to center around, more than perhaps any other thing. So I started running Penguicon in 2024. Okay, I see it coming in focus. So my very first science fiction convention was Penguicon 1 in 2003, and then I started running Penguicon in 2004. So I ran it for 20 years. I resigned in, stepped down in 2019. Last year I started a new conference called Fluidity Forum. Recently I started an Authentic Writing and Circling group that meets in my home. So this has been an ongoing trend of participating in organizations like I3 Detroit Makerspace, where I'm the president. I've been the president there for a couple of years. That's a makerspace in Ferndale. And over those years, I began to notice certain patterns, and those patterns tended to be pretty consistent in this time when a lot of us are trying to restart or reboot a lot of organizations that had a downswing as the entire world turned its back on going out and doing things to an unprecedented degree. Most of the statistics on that tend to bear out the new behavior patterns among people. That's coming back, it's on its way back. And as it's on its way back, this is an opportunity for those of us who really love and get a lot of benefit from activity groups and volunteer organizations to go ahead and start them or revitalize them. Now, if you're going to be doing that during this time, then you might want to know, okay, what kinds of people are there and how do I figure out who there is that I need and what kinds of tasks to give them. So that's what this talk is about. And it is the 6 people you meet in volunteer organizations. First one to talk about is the dreamer. This is usually a founder of the group or some number of founders. And these are typically not extremely realistic people. I've noticed that as I'm a very realistic person, I wasn't starting or founding any, or having any vision, or starting or founding any of my own things for a very, very long time. I'm actually in one of the other categories in this presentation. And it took a very long time to get to the point where I would be like, you know what? Let me be less realistic, have more of a vision, and go ahead and start things. But that took a long time. So I've over and over and over seen founders who are not quite sure what their vision is, but usually they're a social butterfly, very frequently, not always, but a lot of them tend to be very socially well connected and bring in that whole friends group and say, let's do whatever this is that we are. One example, recently there was an event called Vibe Camp. I absolutely loved it, but I was shocked that the very first one was going to have 400 people in it. Because of the fact that once you do that, if you're not quite sure, as they were not quite sure exactly what kind of a thing they were, that what would happen, I said to the founder, I was talking to the founder, we were walking along the pier in New York City, and I was like, what if they turn it into like whatever they want it to be? And she actually has handled that incredibly well, but I said you need more of a vision right from the jump. And then allow that vision to be edited by whoever is attracted to that vision, but you start out having a vision. And so there's been a lot of turmoil, as there is in almost all volunteer organizations, in that one as well. But some of the turmoil is, for example, we have very few, as those of us who are here in this room from I3 Detroit know, we have very few of the founders left. Very few of the founders still remain because they said, let's have it be the least vision that we can possibly have so that we make sure to attract people regardless. And then we'll find out what it is once they're here. And then once they found out what it was, the founders were like, nope, I hate it. And left and never came back.
And this was what?
That's I3 Detroit Makerspace in Ferndale.
Oh,
so
okay.
Around 2010 was the founding of that. And just last week, Nate Bezanson, who was one of those, gave a slide presentation at i3 Detroit about the whole history of i3 Detroit for new members, and he is on board with whatever this is going to be, but he recognized that a lot of the other people back then should not have said, well, let's be whatever, and then when it was that, they said, thanks, I hate it. So have a little bit of a vision, it's probably a good idea. Also, a good piece of advice, connect to the internet. Not part of my presentation.
But generally good.
Generally good advice. So it makes itself into whatever it will be, and years later they don't like it, usually a couple of years, takes about 2 years for that to crystallize. So you have to have this kind of person. If you don't, then generally speaking, nothing gets started because people are smart enough to realize it's going to be miserable. And so they prevent that, and so they never create something awesome, and then realize, thank goodness I did something that made me miserable for a little while because it was worth it. So that's the dreamer. In Fluidity Forum, I have a set of principles that were pretty the sweet spot. Not so specific and so detailed that I was just telling everybody my way or the highway, but I said, let's come together, and after the first Fluidity Forum, let's then review how did that work. Now that people have been drawn to that vision, okay, how do we want to edit that vision and each year increment on that in a way that satisfies the people who actually show up. One of the founding rules of, possibly the only rule originally in i3 Detroit Makerspace, was be excellent to each other, and that has worked out badly. You cannot run on Wheaton's Law, don't be a dick, because it's just not enough, because nobody agrees on what excellence is or on what dickishness is. Over time, you have to have a little bit more of, what do we truly have in common about our norms? Those who are here, what are our real norms? And have a loose framework of a skeleton of those norms, more than just like, be whatever you think excellence is, and then complain that somebody else isn't what you think excellence is, they're what they think excellence is. So that's been a lesson learned. So 2 is the systematizer. The group gets to be more and more work, and you're starting to find the people who are willing to do those things. So in my authentic relating group, I said, there's not that much that I've been doing, but wouldn't we all be happier and more comfortable if we distributed this so that it's like, it's not Matt's group. Why should it be Matt's group? It's our group. So you send out emails. You send out the when is good scheduling system. You do the thing where you'll host in our house occasionally. We're splitting out all those things. And now it's our group. But the very fact of having done that is the beginning of systematization. So in Fluidity Forum, I put out a list of all the things that need doing, just like for any science fiction convention, and as simple as I could, and I said, mix and match from a buffet. If you don't want to do all of this role, tell me what part of this role you want to do. But the very fact of that is creating a schema. So as soon as you systematize it from its loosey-goosey, I'm not sure what this is, origins, you have entered the systematizing phase, which is what I did for PenguaCon, which was, I made these graphics. So for example, what on earth is a guest of honor, nifty guests, this year's program participants, what do they have in common, where's the Venn diagram? Another systematicity that I applied here was, exactly what's the difference between birds of a feather session, roundtable, presentation, panel discussion. The number of participants committed in advance to attend is more than one, or 0. And here you have, like, on this end it's just a bunch of con-suite chatter, but on this end you have some experts who know what they're talking about, so they should be on a panel discussion. These are the distinctions. The group is going to use a bunch of words, and they're not going to know what they mean, and mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, the center cannot hold. So the systematizer is needed to do things like, okay, well, what are all the roles in PenguaCon? Because we have all these different tracks from all this crowd of people. How do we actually turn that into a categorization schema? All right, now it goes to these people who have these responsibilities, the scheduling wrangler steps, and finally, webmaster, program book signage, and now all the attendees. Now, what did that just do? All of this is about ontology. Ontology is about how do you categorize things. Ontologies aren't right or wrong. Ontologies are useful or not useful. That's what an ontology is. It's either useful or it's not useful to some degree or to some purpose in some context for some person. So you look at the group, and you don't necessarily, you kind of prescribe because you have to be a little bit prescriptive, but you're mostly describing. You describe and describe and describe until you prescribe. And finally you're like, let's just round off all the vagueness, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity to a system. And we're like, sorry, vagueness, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. We acknowledge you, but like at some point, you just have to turn it into a schema, even though that's oversimplifying. All models oversimplify, so all systematizers must oversimplify. And we'll see in the process of going through and life cycle of an organization, it calcifies into a system that doesn't serve anybody and is now just perpetuating itself, which we'll talk about in a later slide. So I came into Penguicon and systematized the hell out of it. I had opinions, I had a vision. If somebody doesn't have opinions and doesn't have a vision, this is not the category that they are in, of the person who you need the systematizers to take the sort of like loosey-goosey glop of the vision and turn it into a common set of words for people. Because that's what this is, it's about vocabulary. Ontology is vocabulary. What do we even mean by things so that they can coordinate on them? So they make the group into something specific. And we're going to be talking about that in a later slide. When you see that I'm going to talk about possums and otters. I'm going to talk about making the group into something specific. So let's talk about helpers. Helpers are not very intrinsically motivated. They're there because, usually because, wow, this is a great friends group. Or, I'm dating somebody in the group. Some of the best helpers have been those. There has been, I need to jump in and like get out of the house. And they just need to be fire and forget. Somebody comes to you and you kind of pick up on the fact that you just want, somebody needs to set up the chairs. There's various tasks that you can fire and forget a helper at them. So in science fiction conventions, you'll have the founders, and then they usually like go away and be weird in some corner for the remaining years, as Penguicon's founders have done, and like be weird and fun, and like, okay, you did your job, now just go be weird and fun. With the systematizers have taken over, and then there'll be a bunch of department heads. And the department heads will find a bunch of helpers, usually who gather around the volunteer table in the lobby, and be like, what do you need me to do? Man this door, or what have you. So you gotta have a bunch of helpers, and you have to connect with the internet.
It just popped.
Join Marriott guest. So never forget, join Marriott guest.
Actually, Marriott counts, if you're here in the country.
Why don't I just go ahead and
Marriott got the signal's not strong.
take care of that. Marriott comp. Hopefully that'll stop popping up. All right. This is why systematizers systematize, because the helper needs to follow instructions. And so it's best with a predefined problem space. Find someone who's good at defining like the problem definition. Someone who is good at figuring out what the problem definition even is often it's a dreamer. The dreamer had the idea that, wait a minute, you don't even realize what the problem is. And then the systematizer systematizes a formula with which to solve whatever that problem has been determined to be, and then the helper executes. They're there just because they want the dreamers and systematizers to be happy. Sometimes they want a specific dreamer or systematizer to be happy. This is what I think of as the systematizers come from what could sometimes be termed rationality, in the sense of having a formula, defining a formula, knowing how to execute on a formula. But someone who is, I'm going to use the pre-systematic, systematic, and post-systematic categories of people. The post-systematic person realizes the limits and weirdnesses of systems. Everything we've been doing is so calcified and dumb in all these previous organizations that no longer serve us. The ontologies are broken down. People are using vocabulary for no good reason anymore because it doesn't match the present day. And the dreamer says, I'm going to redefine the problem space. We need this, that, or the other. What they just did was redefine the problem, which is not systematicity, it's post-systematicity. Then the systematizer, who's really good at, usually it's a software developer half the time. And they're like, all right, we're going to have these ontologies, we're going to set up these words, we're going to categorize things. Now I've made a system that perhaps anybody, whether they're even pre-systematic, like a teenager, is often pre-systematic. They're not even to that level yet. And they're mostly socially motivated. A lot of systematized people are socially motivated. And they're the people you want to grab. You gotta get all the Hufflepuffs.
All the black?
You can't succeed unless you get all the Hufflepuffs.
Oh.
So helpers are Hufflepuffs. Okay, so if you are goal maxing your Slytherin goals, you need the Hufflepuffs in order to gain power. If you are goal maxing your Gryffindor goals, you need all the Hufflepuffs in order to have all the courage and like vanquish everything that needs to be vanquished. If you have Ravenclaw goals and you want to be smart and intelligent and learned and do the smart thing, well, the smart thing is to get all the Hufflepuffs to help you do that. Anybody who fails to get all the Hufflepuffs will just fail at any of the other house's goals. So always ask the Sorting Hat to put you in Hufflepuff, regardless of your actual house and the deepest authenticity of your soul. So you can amass all the helpers, and that's where the juice is. That's where you have to have all three of these, the post-systematicity, systematicity, and pre-systematicity all have a place in your organization. And some people in like managerial theory will call this the developmental organization. Because through the past 20 years, I actually moved through those stages myself. Mostly through Penguicon, because of the lessons learned there. So if you have those places, you will gradually learn how to do these things. Or not, if you want to stay at whatever stage you're at, that is also completely acceptable and works fine. So let's talk about the fourth and fifth, the bully and the crybaby. They are not really bullies or crybabies. That's what they're going to call each other. Now this is divided by, I think a lot of it is divided by a mistake over agency and a mistake over our responsibility to each other and one's responsibility for themselves. So a lack of a balance between responsibility for others and responsibility for self-reliance. So a lot of the people called bullies do not want to be responsible for anybody, or lack any constant awareness of like maybe there is a time that you need to be responsible for others. Now, the key differentiator, what makes somebody a crybaby as opposed to like just somebody who needs the group to intervene and help a member of the group, which is that generally speaking, the ones that I've seen over and over, whether I'm on the board of directors of I3 Detroit, Penguicon, or any other organization coming to us, they refuse to allow the disciplinary action to continue. We go to them, we're like, you just had this huge, incredibly public blow up in which you were grandstanding about all these things. We would like to take action because your problem needs to be solved in our community. This cannot be a problem that persists. It should not have happened to you. And they say no, because there would be retaliation. Now, this is why I often in these roles will say, would you like to be in a reverse Kickstarter? The reverse Kickstarter is if the second person comes along and talks about the broken stair guy, and the third person comes along and talks about the broken stair guy, would the three of you together have strength in numbers? It's a reverse Kickstarter because I ask them, what is the number of people it would take for you to come forward? You have come forward to the board and forbidden us to help you, which means I know this broken stair guy is still in my organization, which I don't accept. So that's the key differentiator is that there are those for whom there is no number, because the grandstanding, I hate to speculate about motives, but maybe the grandstanding just is more rewarding than actually fixing the problem. And that will constantly soak up the energy of your volunteers on conflict resolution. So whether you are from, now, this is an important point. If that's not true of you, I'm not talking about you. That's actually kind of crucial. Somebody's like, all right, are you talking about, I have problems, I need them solved. Well, did you help us help you? Did you allow us to help you? Okay, then I'm not talking about you. Volunteer organizations cannot persist if they burn out all the organizers. This is probably the single most solid underlying principle of any activity group or organization that you start or that you're involved with, which means notice all the people who are going to run roughshod over everybody, and finally, like we have a very valuable rule in an organization I'm involved with, which is that we take disciplinary action against you to put you on a timeout if enough people complain for any reason because you're burning us out.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
So, when you said you would not tolerate a person like that in your organization, is there, so obviously it would only take you to decide to come forward or not, but how do you decide that? Do
How
you
does
wait
do that
for
what?
an event to happen? Do you let that person, I mean, at what point do you kind of pick them out mentally and think about, you know, I kind of recognize these traits, I see this person as a potential problem, but do you wait?
I'll usually discuss it with others in leadership and say, and I've had this happen a few times in the past year or two, where I've said, here's this person who it looks like, there's a person who is on the bully side of the spectrum, and I'm identifying usually one or two people on the Crybaby, potentially the Crybaby side of the spectrum, and I'll discuss with the other organizers, are we burning out? And I'll say, listen, our disciplinary action person just resigned because they're getting burned out. Somebody just resigned from the board, or somebody's talking about resigning from the board. We'll be like, okay, how many officers are talking about resigning over this? And then we'll be like, all right, well, who do we see constantly getting into the disciplinary action process? This is somewhat vulnerable for me to say this in public, but that list has both of these people on it, where one person can't get along with anybody and is constantly constantly poor at problem solving. So I identify that to the other people who are leaders in the group. They're asking, this person has asked us with 5 different people who they get into conflict with. They've asked us to solve their problem because they couldn't participate in solving their problem themselves. And I asked the rest of the group, are we there yet? Are we at the point where we're like, you can't successfully be a part of the group where you need to interact with other people if by so doing, you need us to manage all of your conflicts for you. And it's unfair. This is the crucial thing to realize about this slide, is that anytime you need to resolve the conflicts in the group, it's going to involve the person who has been treated poorly, which is not fair to them. And I've realized, as I've tried to come up with systems to avoid that, that it's unavoidable. That they will have to participate in their own solution, at least in some form, at least in stepping forward, at least in allowing the process to go forward. So it's a judgment call where it's difficult to apply a specific formula to whether someone is just too much. But usually it's just like, we've got to put you on like a week where you can't come to this. Or now it's 2 weeks. The third time is 3 weeks. Maybe the fourth time is like, clearly nothing's working. Where we've gone to the people involved in the conflict, we've tried to mediate. But that very act of mediation is putting so much of like, we came to this organization in order to do the things we came to the organization to do, not to be getting between you two all the time. It's a judgment call as to when are people burning out. And that, you just have to ask them. Ask people, ask the other leaders, are we burning out constantly mediating?
Now, are you talking about paid positions or volunteer positions?
As in the title of the talk, never paid positions.
Never paid.
Never paid.
Okay.
And that's a whole other series of lessons.
I just wanted to be clear because, you know, when you talk disciplinary action, it's, you know, I think about, oh, are they getting paid for this or, okay.
Yeah. So whenever, because of the fact that this is the crucial thing about this talk is entirely about the social dynamics of all volunteer organizations, where the very first thing I've seen in the past 20 years that happens is people just up and leave rather than constantly mediate between these two people all the time. They were going to be part of, they came in, they did all kinds of building with other people at I3 Detroit. They were a vibrant contributor to the group, and then they were stepping into a bunch of messes that other people were bad at solving their own problems, and left. Because in volunteer organizations, a person doesn't even have any pay tying them to you. They will leave just like that. And so that's why the standard is what it is. You can't just say, well, we're always going to side with, you know what, everybody has to solve completely their own problems, so you're on your own against the bullies. Or we're always gonna like jump in and manage all of your problems for you, so anytime a Crybaby has like a problem with 10 different people and is burning us out, oh well, it's just the way it has to be. you have to have both perspectives of what's burning us out so that the volunteer organization can even persist.
I find these people really identifiable sometimes on evaluation forms. They say things like, I lost my vegetarianism because of what you served in the con suite.
I'm
Not
sorry,
joking.
that's I'm
Isn't
not
that
laughing, I'm not
terrifying?
laughing at you, I'm laughing
Right?
with you, but like in different contexts.
And seeing that to me was like, oh, this person's a crybaby. I didn't call it that term, but like, that's somebody I don't want to allow.
Someone else would, like the bullies would call them crybabies.
Right,
The
And-
crybabies would call them bullies.
right, and I think, oh, this person cannot take a committee job. I like this, that's my
Yeah.
clue to keep them as a helper, fine, maybe.
Right.
But like, I have to be like, if you can't own your own diet,
Yeah. I would go to a person like that, and if they came to me and they were like, why won't you let me be officer or this, that, or the other, and then why can't you elevate me in the organization? I'd say, we need to help you solve your problems while you also participate in solving your own problems, and it hasn't been enough of a participation from you. So that, there's only so much that can be done without people taking agency because it is a volunteer organization. That's the different social dynamic where agency is key for a person to be an appropriate member and not burn out the whole group. But let's talk about the public. Speaking of burning out the whole group. Now you might think that I'm just gonna say terrible things about random members of the public coming into a group, but actually they provide massive amounts of energy. And we'll talk about ontologically, systematizing, how are we coming up with these definitions, what it is that I mean by the public. Part of it is, you'll notice when they say, like I came out with a speech several years ago called the You Are Penguicon speech. And ever since then, I've been trying to notice who actually, when they talk about Penguicon, says us. And who comes into Penguicon is like, Penguicon are those people who are providing me with a weekend. I paid for my fun, now where is it? And that's the public. It's fine to be casual, and there's actually nothing wrong with that. Walk in, be casual, but what is the percentage, you can track, what is the percentage of the people here who are gonna take, and they're not particularly interested in giving, which is sustainable, that's fine, up past a point of the percentage of the group. The whole organization eventually goes to room temperature unless you do something about this. Like a drink that's left out turns to room temperature because of the ambient temperature of the air. And we formed a group that would be this group to do what this is, but now it's gonna turn into the ambient temperature of the surrounding culture. People come into it like, I know exactly what this is because everything is always normal, sane, safe. Everything is exactly the way I've always known it, and therefore this thing is too. That's the public. And they will make it into the same thing as they've already got everywhere else, and the distinctives are lost. And it kind of goes to room temperature. So often, they like the vibe, not the content. There was a rationalist, like the rationalist community had a significant shift where they started talking about this after Eliezer Yudkowsky published a book called Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality. And it became so popular that a few years later, they suddenly realized there was a massive influx into rationalist meetups of people who just liked the vibes. The smarty pants vibes, but had never read any of the materials. And didn't care. And so that caused them to realize, well, what are we actually maybe we should do something about this. Possums and otters. The possums want to do the thing the group has come together to do. The founders of groups are possums. We want to talk about catapults. We really like catapults. We want to hurl pianos with catapults. We want to talk about the design of catapults. We want to modernize catapults. We want the history of catapults from old centuries. And then the otters are sometimes interested in that, but mostly they're just really funny and a lot of fun to be around. And they bring in a massive amount of other people, and all of a sudden the catapult group has turned into a community. Catapult people are going on vacations together. Catapult people are having dinner at each other's houses. Things are popping off. Everybody's really happy about the catapult group, except why don't we do anything that's remotely catapult related anymore? Say the possums. And then the possums are like, listen, clearly you bring some people who actively hate catapults. maybe you shouldn't have people here who actively hate catapults. I picked this random thing, but actually I recently was talking to somebody who ran a convention where there's a bunch of people who, they looked around themselves and they're like, most of the people are not interested in the topic of our conference anymore, but all their friends are here. They don't want to lose their friends group. So instead of just being friends with those people, they've turned the original vision into not being the original vision. And so this happens in IRC rooms and a lot of chat groups where the possums will go away. First the possums will say, we should really talk about catapults more around here. You don't, so maybe maybe you couldn't come in here and like flood the IRC chat with stuff that is just dank memes. And they say, the otters say, you're being exclusionary. We need to have inclusivity. So to the otters, all people at all times should be for all people at all times. Aren't you funny? Don't we get along? Aren't we having a relationship? Which is all true and good, but what about the catapults? And so the next step is the possums go away, they start a new one, and then the old one kind of fades away because it had nothing to do with anything, and so there was no difference between being in the group and out of the group. And so then they go to the new group. Wash, rinse, repeat. So there's an influx of otters. This possum and otter metaphor is from a blogger in the rationality community called Ayla. She's a sex blogger and a sex worker who has made more money than any other person in history on OnlyFans, and came up with this metaphor because she saw that pattern play out in so many groups. So I'm going to credit her for this metaphor. It's very interesting. Let's talk about the life cycle of a scene that I just was describing. That was just like a chat room, okay? But in an overall scene, let's say the scene involves punk rock, so it's a new music form, a new form of art, a radical political movement, a new religion, a convention, what have you. So the cool thing is invented. Okay, let's say we've got we're going to have this new genre of music, and a lot of this is deriving from David Chapman's essay "Geeks, Mops, and Sociopaths in Subculture Evolution," and I have an episode on my podcast about this because I narrate his writings, and so I borrowed a lot of this, but I made this graphic for it. MOP stands for member of public, and sociopaths are effectively, I call them grifters. And the geeks are the organizer fans. So it's been invented, the creators start to get together and jive off of each other's work. They're collaborating with each other's work, they're learning from each other's work. It's turned into a scene at this point. There was a great article by Kevin Kelly about scenius, which is a term from Brian Eno, that scenius is the scene form of genius. They pointed out that there was a particular place that nobody knew about at the foot of a mountain in a national park where all these climbers were gathering every year. And it was just a revolving door of all the best climbers in the world were camping in this secluded campsite nobody else knew about, and climbing the mountain, and made advances in mountaineering and climbing that hadn't been made in centuries. And then everybody found out about the spot because it started to get notoriety, and it just got flooded with everybody. So scenius happens here. It attracts organizer fans. They might not be the creators, but they're the nerds. They're the geeks. They're the passionate, true fans that are gonna be do or die. They are the diehards. And the scene then attracts the public. So the public is in there and wants a saner thing. They want a safer thing. They want the thing they're used to. They want it with the edges kind of shaved off. Can you play your hit? And that's the bastardized, crude version of the cool thing, which leads to sane washing. Sane washing I got from Trayson Woodgrains. I don't know what his real name is, but a blogger, Trayson Woodgrains, pointed out the story of r/anti-work Reddit, in which the founders were like, yeah, employment should not exist. And gradually accumulated a bunch of much more moderate people who were just there to post about how their boss is mean. And shouldn't there be better labor standards? And the original founders, one of the founders went on, was taken on CNN or Fox or something like that. And they're like, let's talk now to this transgender autistic dog walker. Tell us about anti-work. And spouted things that were the original vision of r/anti-work that most people within the Overton window would find bizarre. Maybe 100 years ago, or from now, it will be considered normal. But made the whole subreddit look, to the public, ridiculous. And all the moderate people who just came there for the memes on the Reddit kicked out the original organizers. All of the original organizers in a constant gaslighting, a constant denial that the challenging weird version ever existed. It gets flushed down the memory hole in the process of sane washing it for public consumption. Oh, this has only ever been about complaining about your boss with funny memes and animated images and wanting better working conditions. And so kicking out the original people. This is the point where in many movements you'll get looting by grifters. So how can, the grifter is somebody who comes in and looks like the original cool musician, the punk musicians. They talk like the original punk musicians. They know how to vibe like that vibe. They are mistaken for the original creators, even though what they represent is something else that they're going to harvest as much money and sex from the members of the public as they can. And people are, this is the urine and cigarette butts stage of the organization. Why is there urine and cigarette butts and broken beer bottles? Like, that's where the scene is now. In this downward slope, the nerds, the geeks who are passionate about the thing for its own sake and are diehards, they're not just casuals walking in saying, oh, what can I get for as little as possible, and then walking out. And they're overworked. And they get more and more and more overworked as it's more and more demanding to clean up the cigarette butts and the urine and the broken beer bottles. Until the burnout of volunteers is pretty much complete at this stage. And the public shrugs and moves on. Now, what do we do? What do I do? I'll tell you what I do about this image, because I believe that to some degree, the world is changing and will always change and probably must always change. And so there's gonna be something else, and you catch the wave of it and you ride it. It's okay. So you ask yourself, what did we get from this? That's what I've been asking myself with a lot of things, as many of the activity groups that I think everybody in this room treasures have been threatened. We almost didn't have this convention. We were this close from canceling a week before the convention, so it's probably on many of our minds. What would we do? And I will tell you, this is just speaking on my behalf, what I look for is what David Chapman in meaningless.com, he's the author of that Geeks, Mops, and Sociopaths essay, calls the 6 textures of the complete stance. Okay, well, what did I ever get from Penguicon? Wonderment, curiosity. Wonderment led to curiosity. Curiosity led to humor, because that's absurd. I experienced awe, and then I was curious about it. I found some absurdity, so there's humor. Humor leads wonderment, curiosity, humor, play, enjoyment, and creation. And the creation is something that you can then feel wonder about, and it kicks off the whole cycle. So as you look for, well, what did we get from this? What did we need? Where can we find that? Where is it alive now? You kick off a new wave and you ride that wave. There's no amount of this where I had to learn the hard way. As I went down this slide, as I went down that hill, trying to hang on to what I already had, trying to keep what I already had from going away, clinging. I didn't have to do that. This is a world in which, if you know how to work sort of wizardry of getting meta rationality and changing your problem definition, there's like wonderment, curiosity, humor, play, enjoyment, and creativity are like fruits that hang off of the branch of every tree of the orchard we are walking through. That's the only solution, because life cycles, organizations always have these life cycles in organizations, it seems.
What was the name of that? What was it, the 6 what? Of
The 6 textures of the complete stance.
complete stance.
Yes, you'll find that at meaningless.com.
Thank you.
My question is this where the original dreamers come in, or the dreamers of the organization, to let's catch this wave?
It's a prime time. When you see that there's a massive amount of interest that everybody's like, what on earth is going wrong, and you watch the downward slide, The downward slide is a prime moment to catch all those people and say, wait a minute, before we all wander away alone and powerless, what if we figure out what we wanted from this that the current state of the world no longer supports?
And that could be why, board members are only board members for a specific amount of time, so that you always get new blood in.
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
It's a good idea. Like PenguinCon has board members who elect each other and are elected for life.
Oh, okay.
Which is, everyone thinks is bad, including
Yeah,
me.
but they
I
have
was
the
on the
elect-
board for 10 years and said we should stop, we should not be doing this.
Okay.
But that has been, in a lot of organizations, when you can't have that fresh blood, this is the downfall that you see. It's very challenging for me to talk about problems and solutions because it sounds like blame, which is just not helpful. We are currently in a state in which the hospitality industry is changing. What it is that people need is changing. There's a widespread amount right now of people getting very sick, both emotionally and physically. Tastes are changing. People are getting older and having kids. Like, this is not a blame situation, but it is a, what can we do? What did we originally want, even if we can't have it in that form? How do you change the problem definition and start some kind of new thing with all these people who still want to get those textures of the complete stance? Or let's say you're a Christian organization or a religious sect or a whatever. You don't have to care about the 6 textures of the complete stance, but identify what it was you were getting. Whatever that may be. For me, I know it's those 6 things. For others, it may be different. It could be with music, it's going to be different. With art movements, it's going to be different. With new religions, it's going to be different. With a subreddit, it's going to be different. So that's the basic framework of the slides. This is the last slide that I have. And I was hoping, let's see what time it is, we can have some time for questions.
About 10 minutes to.
About 10 till?
12 to.
12 to, okay, well, we have a few minutes left, around like 10 to or 8 until we'll need to clear out, but does anyone have any other thoughts, comments, ideas?
How would I find your blog? I'm old, I'm 70, so.
I'd love you to read my blog. It is, the current one relevant to this of my many blogs is fluidity.substack.com. There's a particular article on there about, it's called Applications Open, and it is about designing friendly egregores. Now, let me unpack that for a second. We're talking a lot about how can you make a friendly AI these days. So it's a popular topic. How can you make an AI who won't kill all humans? Well, we've got this thing called metaphorically egregores, however you, or maybe you don't think it's a metaphor, in which it's the spirit of a group, it's the spirit of a culture, it's the spirit of a society, it's the spirit of a scene. And that egregore can then lead you down some very dark paths, or it can energize you, the spirit of that community. How can we design in a new organization the spirit of the community? And so it's not in this talk, but in that blog post I talk about how to avoid factionalism, how to avoid vibe collapse, and how to avoid decoherence in the process of trying to get a group together to actually cohere in a sort of like vaguely shared vision and not have that collapse. Not to collapse into we are all going to be very samey and boring, and not to collapse into the egregores of different like factions come in and start having more of an interest in like fighting each other than in the mission of the group. So I strongly recommend starting with that particular blog post for following up on the topics of this talk. Thank you for asking. That's fluidity.substack.com.
Okay.
I think one thing that's interesting, and you kind of alluded to it at one point, is that the time here doesn't have a specific value because a lot of how that troughs and how that ends up reaching its zenith comes from how the group is organized and how it's approached. Like if you have a better set rule system and more granularity, or you're more selective in the people that you allow in, or that you want to participate and make sure that they participate in specific ways, it tends to make for a smaller group that the public doesn't get into as fast, but it tends to last longer because you have more cohesion throughout.
let me kickstart off of that to a recommendation of a book by Caveat Magister on that subject. The Scene That Became Cities, What Organizations Can Learn from Burning Man. Because they did have a barrier to entry at first, which was going out into a life-threatening desert. And then they
That's a
eventually
hell of a
looked around themselves and after enough years had passed, said, what do we see working here? And turned it into 10 principles. The regional burns all said, give us something to work with so that we know that we're doing what the Burning Man thing is. And they weren't prescriptive, they were descriptive. They're like, at Burning Man, we've noticed these 10 things happen. And those 10 things have been, in my opinion, magic as a set of principles for like guiding the success that it's had to continue to be a vibrant thing even to this day. It doesn't look like it's going anywhere anytime soon. So Caveat Magister is he calls it psychomagic. He's a psycho-magician in the sense of creating experience design that would create weirdness that will happen, that will activate you psychologically if you go through the experience that has been designed as like an art project that he did in San Francisco with a lot of other people in San Francisco for many years, and applied that to how can you influence an entirely volunteer organization to build a 100,000 person city in the middle of a desert.
You said his
So-
name's Caveat Magister?
Yeah. Ben Locks is his driver's license name. But his burner name is Caveat Magister.
That is awesome.
Well, I don't think we have much time left to be in this room, but I'm really happy at the crowd that we drew and that each of you was here. So thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.
Great.